Give rise to.
gây ra, dẫn đến.
Give rise to. Rapid urbanization gives rise to social problems. Be attributable to.
Có thể quy cho.
Be attributable to. The decline is largely attributable to poor policy. Exacerbate the problem.
Làm trầm trọng thêm vấn đề.
Exacerbate the problem. Inequality exacerbates the problem of social unrest. Have a detrimental effect on.
Có tác động có hại đến.
Have a detrimental effect on. Pollution has a detrimental effect on public health. Trigger a chain of events.
Kích hoạt một chuỗi sự kiện.
Trigger a chain of events. One bad decision can trigger a chain of events. Be inextricably linked to.
Liên kết không thể tách rời với.
Be inextricably linked to. Poverty is inextricably linked to lack of education. Stem directly from.
Xuất phát trực tiếp từ.
Stem directly from. Many social ills stem directly from unemployment. Produce far-reaching consequences.
Tạo ra hậu quả sâu rộng.
Produce far-reaching consequences. Climate change produces far-reaching consequences. Play a pivotal role in.
Đóng vai trò then chốt trong.
Play a pivotal role in. Education plays a pivotal role in reducing poverty. Be a direct consequence of.
Là hậu quả trực tiếp của.
Be a direct consequence of. Crime is often a direct consequence of poverty. Exert a profound influence on.
Gây ảnh hưởng sâu sắc lên.
Exert a profound influence on. Culture exerts a profound influence on behavior. Precipitatia crisis.
Gây ra một cuộc khủng hoảng.
Precipitatia crisis. Poor governance can precipitate an economic crisis. Contribute significantly to.
Đóng góp đáng kể vào.
Contribute significantly to. Technology contributes significantly to productivity. Lie at the root of.
Nằm ở gốc rễ của.
Lie at the root of. Inequality lies at the root of social tension. Have a knock-on effect on.
Có tác động dây chuyền lên.
Have a knock-on effect on. Inflation has a knock-on effect on living standards. It is widely contended that.
Người ta tranh luận rộng rãi rằng.
It is widely contended that. It is widely contended that technology isolates people. One could argue convincingly that.
Người ta có thể lập luận thuyết phục rằng.
One could argue convincingly that. One could argue convincingly that taxes should rise. It is my firm conviction that.
Tôi hoàn toàn tin rằng.
It is my firm conviction that. It is my firm conviction that education is a right. The evidence overwhelmingly suggests.
Bằng chứng áp đảo cho thấy.
The evidence overwhelmingly suggests. The evidence overwhelmingly suggests diet matters. It would be remiss to ignore.
Sẽ là thiếu sót nếu bỏ qua.
It would be remiss to ignore. It would be remiss to ignore the social costs. The prevailing view holds that.
Quan điểm phổ biến cho rằng.
The prevailing view holds that. The prevailing view holds that growth is essential. There is compelling evidence to suggest.
Có bằng chứng thuyết phục cho thấy.
There is compelling evidence to suggest. There is compelling evidence to suggest it works. On balance, it would appear that.
Nhìn tổng thể có vẻ rằng.
On balance, it would appear that. On balance, it would appear that benefits outweigh costs. This raises the pertinent question of.
Điều này đặt ra câu hỏi phù hợp về.
This raises the pertinent question of. This raises the pertinent question of affordability. Not without justification.
Không phải không có lý.
Not without justification. Critics argue not without justification that costs are high. It stands to reason that.
Điều đó hợp lý rằng.
It stands to reason that. It stands to reason that prevention is cheaper than cure. A cogent argument can be made.
Có thể đưa ra lập luận thuyết phục.
A cogent argument can be made. A cogent argument can be made for stricter laws. It is debatable whether.
Còn nhiều tranh cãi liệu rằng.
It is debatable whether. It is debatable whether technology improves learning. The weight of evidence points to.
Sức nặng của bằng chứng chỉ ra.
The weight of evidence points to. The weight of evidence points to climate action. By any objective measure.
Theo bất kỳ thước đo khách quan nào.
By any objective measure, the policy has failed. Underpin a theory.
Làm nền tảng trong một lý thuyết.
Underpin a theory. Strong data underpins the theory. Corroborate the findings.
Xác nhận các phát hiện.
Corroborate the findings. Later research corroborated the findings. Refute an argument.
Bác bỏ một lập luận.
Refute an argument. She refuted the argument with solid evidence. Elucidate a concept.
Làm sáng tỏ một khái niệm.
Elucidate a concept. The professor elucidate the concept clearly. Extrapolate from data.
Ngoại suy từ dữ liệu.
Extrapolate from data. We can extrapolate trends from this data. Substantiate a claim.
Chứng minh một tuyên bố.
Substantiate a claim. You must substantiate every claim with evidence. Call into question.
Đặt câu hỏi về, nghi ngờ.
Call into question. New data calls the original findings into question. Shed new light on.
Chiếu sáng mới lên, làm sáng tỏ thêm.
Shed new light on. The study sheds new light on human behavior. Lend credence to.
Tăng thêm độ tin cậy cho.
Lend credence to. This discovery lends credence to the theory. Give credence to.
Ủng hộ, xác nhận.
Give credence to. The results give credence to earlier predictions. Warrant further investigation.
Cần điều tra thêm.
Warrant further investigation. These anomalies warrant further investigation. Paint a misleading picture.
Vẽ ra một bức tranh sai lệch.
Paint a misleading picture. Statistics can paint a misleading picture. Draw a clear distinction between.
Phân biệt rõ ràng giữa.
Draw a clear distinction between. We must draw a clear distinction between the two. Call for urgent action.
Kêu gọi hành động khẩn cấp.
Call for urgent action. The report calls for urgent action on emissions. Transcend national boundaries.
Vượt qua ranh giới quốc gia.
Transcend national boundaries. Climate change transcends national boundaries. While it is true that.
Mặc dù đúng là.
While it is true that cars pollute, they remain necessary. Admittedly.
Thừa nhận rằng.
Admittedly, the plan has some weaknesses. Granted that.
Thừa nhận rằng.
Granted that costs are high, the benefits are greater. One cannot deny that.
Không thể phủ nhận rằng.
One cannot deny that technology has changed lives. Even so.
Dù vậy.
Even so, the risks must not be underestimated. Notwithstanding this.
Bất chấp điều này.
Notwithstanding this, the policy was implemented. This is not to say that.
Điều này không có nghĩa là.
This is not to say that all technology is harmful. It would be naive to suggest.
Sẽ là ngây thơ khi gợi ý.
It would be naive to suggest one solution fits all. To a certain degree.
Ở một mức độ nhất định.
To a certain degree, both sides have valid points. Whilst acknowledging that.
Trong khi thừa nhận rằng.
Whilst acknowledging its merits, I oppose the plan. There is some merit in.
Có một số giá trị trong.
There is some merit in the opposing argument. It is only fair to acknowledge.
Chỉ công bằng khi thừa nhận.
It is only fair to acknowledge the limitations. Up to a point.
Đến một mức độ nhất định.
Up to a point. I agree with this view up to a point. For all its merits.
Với tất cả ưu điểm của nó.
For all its merits, the plan remains impractical. The fact remains that.
Thực tế vẫn là.
The fact remains that inequality is widening. A marked deterioration in.
Sự xuống cấp rõ rệt trong.
There has been a marked deterioration in air quality. An unprecedented rise in.
Sự gia tăng chưa từng có trong.
There has been an unprecedented rise in mental illness. A commensurate increase in.
Sự gia tăng tương xứng trong.
A commensurate increase in. A rise in demand led to a commensurate increase in prices. An acute shortage of.
Sự thiếu hụt nghiêm trọng về.
An acute shortage of. Many regions face an acute shortage of clean water. A burgeoning demand for.
Nhu cầu ngày càng tăng về.
A burgeoning demand for. There is a burgeoning demand for electric vehicles. The root cause of the problem.
Nguyên nhân gốc rễ của vấn đề.
The root cause of the problem. We must identify the root cause of the problem. A vicious cycle of deprivation.
Vòng luẩn quẩn của sự thiếu thốn.
A vicious cycle of deprivation. Poverty creates a vicious cycle of deprivation. A widening gulf between.
Khoảng cách ngày càng lớn giữa.
A widening gulf between. There is a widening gulf between rich and poor. The overriding priority.
Ưu tiên hàng đầu.
The overriding priority. Economic recovery is the overriding priority. A prerequisite for success.
Điều kiện tiên quyết cho thành công.
A prerequisite for success. Hard work is a prerequisite for success. A fundamental shift in.
Sự chuyển dịch căn bản trong.
A fundamental shift in. There has been a fundamental shift in attitudes. An inherent flaw in.
Lỗ hổng cố hữu trong.
An inherent flaw in. There is an inherent flaw in this reasoning. A stark reminder of.
Lời nhắc nhở rõ ràng về.
A stark reminder of. The disaster is a stark reminder of climate risks. A catalyst for change.
Chất xúc tác cho sự thay đổi.
A catalyst for change. Crisis can be a catalyst for change. The hallmark of.
Dấu hiệu đặc trưng của.
The hallmark of. Attention to detail is the hallmark of great writing. Stand in stark contrast to.
Tương phản rõ nét với.
Stand in stark contrast to. This policy stands in stark contrast to the previous one. Bear a striking resemblance to.
Có sự giống nhau nổi bật với.
Bear a striking resemblance to. The two cases bear a striking resemblance to each other. Differ markedly from.
Khác biệt đáng kể so với.
Differ markedly from. The results differ markedly from previous studies. Pale in comparison with.
Kém xa khi so với.
Pale in comparison with. Last year's figures pale in comparison with this year's. Be vastly superior to.
Vượt trội hơn nhiều so với.
Be vastly superior to. Electric vehicles are vastly superior to petrol cars. Outweigh the benefits of.
Lớn hơn lợi ích của.
Outweigh the benefits of. The risks outweigh the benefits of the procedure. Dwarf the contribution of.
Vượt xa đóng góp của.
Dwarf the contribution of. China's output dwarfs the contribution of other nations. Share certain characteristics with.
Có một số đặc điểm chung với.
Share certain characteristics with. This disease shares certain characteristics with flu. Draw an analogy between.
Vẽ ra sự tương đồng giữa.
Draw an analogy between. We can draw an analogy between the brain and a computer. By the same token.
Theo logic tương tự.
By the same token. By the same token, both policies carry equal risk. At the other end of the spectrum.
Ở đầu kia của phổ.
At the other end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum lies total freedom. Mirror the pattern of.
Phản ánh mô hình của.
Mirror the pattern of. These results mirror the pattern of earlier studies. A far cry from.
Rất khác xa so với.
A far cry from. The current situation is a far cry from the ideal. On a par with.
Ngang bằng với.
On a par with. His skills are now on a par with the best. Eclipse the achievements of.
Vượt qua thành tích của.
Eclipse the achievements of. Her record eclipses the achievements of all predecessors. It is reasonable to assume that.
Hợp lý để cho rằng.
It is reasonable to assume that. It is reasonable to assume that trends will continue. There is a tendency for.
Có xu hướng.
There is a tendency for. There is a tendency for governments to overspend. Under certain circumstances.
Trong những hoàn cảnh nhất định.
Under certain circumstances. Under certain circumstances, the rule may not apply. To varying degrees.
Ở các mức độ khác nhau.
To varying degrees. All countries are affected to varying degrees. In most but not all cases.
Trong hầu hết nhưng không phải tất cả trường hợp.
In most but not all cases. In most but not all cases, the treatment works. With some notable exceptions.
Với một số ngoại lệ đáng chú ý.
With some notable exceptions. With some notable exceptions, the policy succeeded. Broadly but not universally.
Rộng rãi nhưng không phổ quát.
Broadly but not universally. This view is broadly but not universally held. Tend to be associated with.
Có xu hướng liên quan đến.
Tend to be associated with. Stress tends to be associated with poor sleep. May well be the case that.
Có thể hoàn toàn là trường hợp.
May well be the case that. It may well be the case that costs will rise. In all likelihood.
Rất có khả năng.
In all likelihood, prices will continue to rise. All things being equal.
Nếu mọi thứ bình đẳng.
All things being equal, the cheaper option is better. Ostensibly.
Bề ngoài có vẻ.
Ostensibly. The policy ostensibly aims to reduce poverty. In principle, if not in practice.
Về nguyên tắc nếu không trên thực tế.
In principle, if not in practice. The policy works in principle, if not in practice. Subject to certain conditions.
Tùy thuộc vào một số điều kiện nhất định.
Subject to certain conditions. The agreement is subject to certain conditions. With the caveat that.
Với lưu ý rằng.
With the caveat that. I support the plan with the caveat that it is monitored. In the final analysis.
Xét cho cùng.
In the final analysis, education determines outcomes. It follows logically that.
Từ đó suy ra một cách logic.
It follows logically that prevention is better than cure. What is more?
Hơn nữa.
What is more? The plan is costly. What is more, it is impractical. To put it another way.
Nói cách khác.
To put it another way, the system is broken. With this in mind.
Với điều này trong tâm trí.
With this in mind, a new approach is necessary. This notwithstanding.
Bất chấp điều này.
This notwithstanding, the government pressed ahead. Insofar as.
Trong chừng mực.
Insofar as we can tell, the policy has worked. To this end.
Để đạt được mục tiêu này.
To this end, greater investment is required. It is worth noting that.
Đáng chú ý rằng.
It is worth noting that exceptions do exist. As a case in point.
Như một ví dụ điển hình.
As a case in point, consider the Singapore model. By the same logic.
Theo logic tương tự.
By the same logic, banning cars would reduce pollution. Taken together.
Kết hợp lại.
Taken together, the findings paint a clear picture. More specifically.
Cụ thể hơn.
More specifically, the problem lies in funding. Crucially.
Điều quan trọng là.
Crucially, the data was collected independently. Above all else.
Trên hết.
Above all else, we must protect the environment. Irreversible environmental damage.
Thiệt hại môi trường không thể phục hồi.
Irreversible environmental damage. Deforestation causes irreversible environmental damage. Ecological footprint.
Dấu chân sinh thái.
Ecological footprint. We must reduce our ecological footprint urgently. Carbon-intensive industry.
Ngành công nghiệp thâm dụng carbon.
Carbon-intensive industry. Steel is a carbon-intensive industry. Net zero emissions.
Phát thải ròng bằng không.
Net zero emissions. The goal is to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Environmental degradation.
Suy thoái môi trường.
Environmental degradation threatens future generations. Tipping point.
Điểm tới hạn.
A tipping point. Scientists warn we are near a climate tipping point. Mitigate the impact of.
Giảm thiểu tác động của.
Mitigate the impact of. Trees help mitigate the impact of urban heat. A concerted effort to.
Nỗ lực phối hợp để.
A concerted effort to. A concerted effort to reduce waste is required. Place a strain on.
Gây áp lực lên.
Place a strain on. Rapid growth places a strain on natural resources. Habitat fragmentation.
Phân mảnh môi trường sống.
Habitat fragmentation. Roads cause habitat fragmentation for wildlife. Renewable energy transition.
Chuyển đổi năng lượng tái tạo.
Renewable energy transition. The renewable energy transition must accelerate. A binding international agreement.
Một thỏa thuận quốc tế ràng buộc.
A binding international agreement. A binding international agreement is essential. Carbon capture technology.
Công nghệ thu giữ carbon.
Carbon capture technology. Carbon capture technology is still in early stages. Ecological collapse.
Sụp đổ sinh thái.
Ecological collapse. Without action, ecological collapse is possible. Stewardship of natural resources.
Quản lý tài nguyên thiên nhiên.
Stewardship of natural resources. Good stewardship of natural resources is vital. Entrenched social inequality.
Bất bình đẳng xã hội ăn sâu.
Entrenched social inequality. Entrenched social inequality is hard to dismantle. Marginalized communities.
Cộng đồng bị gạt ra ngoài lề.
Marginalized communities. Marginalized communities need greater support. Systemic discrimination.
Phân biệt đối xử có hệ thống.
Systemic discrimination. Systemic discrimination must be addressed structurally. Socioeconomic disparity.
Chênh lệch kinh tế xã hội.
Socioeconomic disparity. Socioeconomic disparity affects health outcomes. Intergenerational poverty.
Nghèo đói liên thế hệ.
Intergenerational poverty. Education can break the cycle of intergenerational poverty. Upward social mobility.
Dịch chuyển xã hội lên trên.
Upward social mobility. Education is key to upward social mobility. Disproportionately affect.
Ảnh hưởng không cân xứng đến.
Disproportionately affect. Budget cuts disproportionately affect the poor. A two-tier system.
Hệ thống 2 tầng.
A two-tier system. Private education creates a two-tier system. Social stratification.
Phân tầng xã hội.
Social stratification. Wealth leads to social stratification. Redistributive policy.
Chính sách phân phối lại.
Redistributive policy. A redistributive policy can narrow the wealth gap. Affirmative action.
Hành động khẳng định tích cực.
Affirmative action. Affirmative action aims to level the playing field. The poverty trap.
Bẫy nghèo đói.
The poverty trap. Benefits cuts can actually deepen the poverty trap. A level playing field.
Sân chơi bình đẳng.
A level playing field. Not everyone starts with a level playing field. Glass ceiling.
Rào cản vô hình.
Glass ceiling. Women still face a glass ceiling in many industries. Perpetuate the status quo.
Duy trì hiện trạng.
Perpetuate the status quo. Weak policies simply perpetuate the status quo. Algorithmic bias.
Thiên kiến thuật toán.
Algorithmic bias. Algorithmic bias can entrench existing inequality. Exponential growth in.
Tăng trưởng theo cấp số nhân trong.
Exponential growth in. There has been exponential growth in data generation. Disruptive innovation.
Đổi mới mang tính đột phá.
Disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation transforms entire industries. Surveillance capitalism.
Chủ nghĩa tư bản giám sát.
Surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism commodifies personal data. Digital literacy.
Hiểu biết kỹ thuật số.
Digital literacy. Digital literacy is now an essential life skill. Pose an existential threat.
Đặt ra mối đe dọa hiện hữu.
Pose an existential threat. AI could pose an existential threat to employment. Autonomous decision making.
Ra quyết định tự động.
Autonomous decision making. Autonomous decision making by AI raises ethical issues. Platform monopoly.
Độc quyền nền tảng.
Platform monopoly. Platform monopoly stifles competition. Data sovereignty.
chủ quyền dữ liệu,
Data sovereignty. Nations are increasingly concerned about data sovereignty. Technological determinism.
thuyết quyết định luận công nghệ,
Technological determinism. Technological determinism overstates technology's power. Proliferation of.
sự phổ biến của,
The proliferation of smartphones changed communication. Render obsolete.
làm cho lỗi thời,
Render obsolete. AI will render many current jobs obsolete. Harness the power of.
khai thác sức mạnh của,
Harness the power of. We must harness the power of renewable energy. Ethical framework.
khung đạo đức,
Ethical framework. AI needs a robust ethical framework. Digital divide.
khoảng cách kỹ thuật số,
Digital divide. The digital divide disadvantages rural communities. Pedagogical approach.
phương pháp sư phạm,
Pedagogical approach. A student-centered pedagogical approach yields results. Academic rigor.
sự nghiêm ngặt học thuật,
Academic rigor. Standards must maintain academic rigor. Rote memorisation.
học vẹt,
Rote memorisation. Rote memorization inhibits critical thinking. Holistic development.
phát triển toàn diện,
Holistic development. Schools should focus on holistic development. Cultivate a love of learning.
nuôi dưỡng tình yêu học tập,
Cultivate a love of learning. Teachers should cultivate a love of learning. Intellectual curiosity.
sự tò mò trí tuệ,
Intellectual curiosity. Intellectual curiosity drives great achievements. Educational attainment.
thành tích học tập,
Educational attainment. Socioeconomic status affects educational attainment. Nurture talent.
nuôi dưỡng tài năng,
Nurture talent. Schools must identify and nurture talent. Foster independent thinking.
thúc đẩy tư duy độc lập,
Foster independent thinking. Universities should foster independent thinking. Embed skills in the curriculum.
nhúng kỹ năng vào chương trình,
Embed skills in the curriculum. Digital skills should be embedded in the curriculum. A culture of excellence.
văn hóa xuất sắc,
A culture of excellence. The school fosters a culture of excellence. Address the achievement gap.
giải quyết khoảng cách thành tích,
Address the achievement gap. More funding is needed to address the achievement gap. Evidence-based teaching.
giảng dạy dựa trên bằng chứng,
Evidence-based teaching. Evidence-based teaching improves student outcomes. Transformative learning.
học tập mang tính biến đổi,
Transformative learning. Travel can be a transformative learning experience. Lifelong learning culture.
văn hóa học tập suốt đời,
Lifelong learning culture. Companies must build a lifelong learning culture. Underlying health condition.
tình trạng sức khỏe tiềm ẩn,
Underlying health condition. Patients with an underlying health condition are at risk. Holistic approach to health.
cách tiếp cận toàn diện đến sức khỏe,
Holistic approach to health. A holistic approach to health considers mind and body. Health inequity.
bất công trong y tế,
Health inequity. Health inequity is a global crisis. A preventive healthcare.
chăm sóc sức khỏe dự phòng,
Preventive healthcare. Preventive healthcare reduces long-term costs. Comorbidity.
đa bệnh lý,
Comorbidity. Obesity is associated with multiple comorbidities. Psychosomatic illness.
bệnh tâm thể,
Psychosomatic illness. Stress can manifest as psychosomatic illness. Destigmatize mental illness.
xóa bỏ kỳ thị về bệnh tâm thần,
Destigmatize mental illness. Society must destigmatize mental illness. Biomedical research.
nghiên cứu y sinh,
Biomedical research. Biomedical research has transformed modern medicine. Herd immunity.
miễn dịch cộng đồng,
Herd immunity. Vaccination programs build herd immunity. Clinical trial.
thử nghiệm lâm sàng,
Clinical trial. All drugs must pass a clinical trial before approval. Pharmacological intervention.
can thiệp dược lý,
Pharmacological intervention. Pharmacological intervention alone is insufficient. Strain health services.
gây áp lực lên dịch vụ y tế.
Strain health services. An aging population strains health services. Mortality rate.
Tỷ lệ tử vong.
Mortality rate. Improved sanitation reduced the mortality rate. Mental health pandemic.
Đại dịch sức khỏe tâm thần.
Mental health pandemic. Experts warn of a mental health pandemic. Chronic underfunding.
Thiếu kinh phí mãn tính.
Chronic underfunding. Chronic underfunding has weakened the health system. Fiscal stimulus.
Kích thích tài khóa.
Fiscal stimulus. The government implemented a fiscal stimulus package. Monetary policy.
Chính sách tiền tệ.
Monetary policy. Central banks use monetary policy to control inflation. Economic stagnation.
Trì trệ kinh tế.
Economic stagnation. Economic stagnation leads to social unrest. Austerity measures.
Các biện pháp thắt lưng buộc bụng.
Austerity measures. Austerity measures hit the poorest hardest. Trade protectionism.
Chủ nghĩa bảo hộ thương mại.
Trade protectionism. Trade protectionism can harm global growth. Trickle-down economics.
Kinh tế học nhỏ giọt.
Trickle-down economics. Critics reject trickle-down economics as ineffective. Quantitative easing.
Nới lỏng định lượng.
Quantitative easing. Quantitative easing was used to stimulate the economy. Inflationary pressure.
Áp lực lạm phát.
Inflationary pressure. Rising oil prices create inflationary pressure. A market failure.
Thất bại thị trường.
Market failure. Pollution is an example of market failure. Structural unemployment.
Thất nghiệp cơ cấu.
Structural unemployment. Automation causes structural unemployment. Sovereign debt crisis.
Khủng hoảng nợ quốc gia.
Sovereign debt crisis. The sovereign debt crisis destabilized the Eurozone. Diminishing returns.
Lợi nhuận giảm dần.
Diminishing returns. Beyond a point investment yields diminishing returns. Economic interdependence.
Sự phụ thuộc kinh tế lẫn nhau.
Economic interdependence. Globalization creates economic interdependence. Deflationary spiral.
Vòng xoáy giảm phát.
Deflationary spiral. A deflationary spiral can cripple an economy. Purchasing power parity.
Ngăn giá sức mua.
Purchasing power parity. Purchasing power parity allows fair income comparison. Rule of law.
Nhà nước pháp quyền.
Rule of law. A stable society depends on the rule of law. Judicial independence.
Độc lập tư pháp.
Judicial independence. Judicial independence is essential in a democracy. Checks and balances.
Kiểm tra và cân bằng quyền lực.
Checks and balances. Checks and balances prevent authoritarian rule. Legislative reform.
Cải cách lập pháp.
Legislative reform. Legislative reform is long overdue. Punitive measure.
Biện pháp trừng phạt.
Punitive measure. Punitive measures alone do not reduce crime. Civil liberties.
Quyền tự do dân sự.
Civil liberties. Surveillance threatens civil liberties. Due process of law.
Thủ tục pháp lý đúng đắn.
Due process of law. Every accused person deserves due process of law. Ratify an agreement.
Phê chuẩn một thỏa thuận.
Ratify an agreement. The Senate refused to ratify the agreement. Constitutional amendment.
Sửa đổi hiến pháp.
Constitutional amendment. A constitutional amendment requires broad consensus. Political accountability.
Trách nhiệm giải trình chính trị.
Political accountability. Political accountability requires a free press. Abuse of executive power.
Lạm dụng quyền hành pháp.
Abuse of executive power. The court ruled it was an abuse of executive power. Multilateral cooperation.
Hợp tác đa phương.
Multilateral cooperation. Climate change demands multilateral cooperation. Penal system.
Hệ thống hình phạt.
Penal system. Reform of the penal system is urgently needed. Sovereign right.
Quyền chủ quyền.
Sovereign right. Nations have a sovereign right to set their own laws. Enact legislation.
Ban hành luật pháp.
Enact legislation. Parliament must enact legislation to protect workers. Inversion for emphasis.
Đảo ngữ để nhấn mạnh.
Inversion for emphasis. Not only does education empower, but it also liberates. Cleft sentence.
Câu tắt.
Cleft sentence. It is education that holds the key to development. Nominalization.
Danh từ hóa.
Nominalization. The rapid urbanization of cities poses challenges. Participle clause.
Mệnh đề phân từ.
Participle clause. Having considered both sides, I favor intervention. Conditional inversion.
Đảo ngữ điều kiện.
Conditional inversion. Were the government to act now, the damage could be minimized. Fronted adverbial.
Trạng ngữ đứng đầu câu.
Fronted adverbial. Only by working together can we solve this. Passive construction for formality.
Cấu trúc bị động để trang trọng.
Passive construction for formality. It has been argued that the policy is flawed. Relative clause for precision.
Mệnh đề quan hệ để chính xác.
Relative clause for precision. This is an issue that demands immediate attention. A positive phrase.
Cụm đồng vị.
A positive phrase. Education. The cornerstone of development must be prioritized. Mixed conditional.
Câu điều kiện hỗn hợp.
Mixed conditional. If we had acted sooner, the situation would be different. Abstract subject.
Chủ ngữ trừu tượng.
Abstract subject. What remains unclear is the long-term impact. Emphatic do.
Trợ động từ nhấn mạnh.
Emphatic do. Governments do have a responsibility to act. It cleft for emphasis.
Câu tách với it để nhấn mạnh.
It cleft for emphasis. It was the lack of funding that caused the failure. What cleft sentence?
Câu tách với VKH.
What cleft sentence? What we need is a comprehensive long-term strategy. Concessive clause.
Mệnh đề nhượng bộ.
Concessive clause. Although costly, the benefits justify the investment. Race to the bottom.
Cuộc đua xuống đáy.
Race to the bottom. Tax competition creates a race to the bottom. Cultural homogenization.
Đồng nhất hóa văn hóa.
Cultural homogenization. Globalization risks cultural homogenization. Economic hegemony.
Bá quyền kinh tế.
Economic hegemony. The U.S. has long enjoyed economic hegemony. Geopolitical tension.
Căng thẳng địa chính trị.
Geopolitical tension. Geopolitical tension disrupts global trade. Multilateral institution.
Tổ chức đa phương.
Multilateral institution. Multilateral institutions coordinate global responses. Neo-colonial relationship.
Mối quan hệ tân thực dân.
Neo-colonial relationship. Some argue that aid creates a neo-colonial relationship. Cross-border collaboration.
Hợp tác xuyên biên giới.
Cross-border collaboration. Cross-border collaboration accelerates research. Diaspora community.
Cộng đồng diaspora.
Diaspora community. The diaspora community maintains cultural ties. Protectionist sentiment.
Tình cảm bảo hộ.
Protectionist sentiment. Protectionist sentiment is rising in many nations. Labor arbitrage.
Chênh lệch lao động.
Labor arbitrage. Companies exploit labor arbitrage by offshoring. Supply chain resilience.
Khả năng phục hồi chuỗi cung ứng.
Supply chain resilience. COVID exposed gaps in supply chain resilience. Soft power projection.
Thể hiện quyền lực mềm.
Soft power projection. Cultural exports are a form of soft power projection. Deglobalization trend.
Xu hướng phi toàn cầu hóa.
Deglobalization trend. A deglobalization trend has emerged post-pandemic. Economic nationalism.
Chủ nghĩa dân tộc kinh tế.
Economic nationalism. Economic nationalism threatens free trade agreements. Transnational corporation.
Tập đoàn xuyên quốc gia.
Transnational corporation. Transnational corporations wield enormous power. Exhibit a downward trajectory.
Thể hiện quỹ đạo đi xuống.
Exhibit a downward trajectory. Sales figures exhibit a downward trajectory. Undergo a dramatic fluctuation.
Trải qua biến động mạnh.
Undergo a dramatic fluctuation. Prices underwent a dramatic fluctuation. Demonstrate a near linear increase.
Thể hiện sự tăng gần như tuyến tính.
demonstrate a near linear increase. The data demonstrates a near linear increase. Converge at a single point.
Hội tụ tại một điểm.
Converge at a single point. The two trends converge at a single point in 2020. Account for a disproportionate share.
Chiếm tỷ lệ không cân xứng.
Account for a disproportionate share. China accounts for a disproportionate share of output. Record a negligible change.
Ghi nhận sự thay đổi không đáng kể.
Record a negligible change. The figures recorded a negligible change. Follow an erratic pattern.
Theo mô hình không đều.
Follow an erratic pattern. Rainfall figures follow an erratic pattern. Surge to a record high of.
Tăng vọt lên mức cao kỷ lục.
Surge to a record high of. Production surged to a record high of 5 million units. Trough at.
Chạm đáy ở mức.
Trough at. Sales troughed at 200 units in January. Maintain a relatively stable position.
Duy trì vị trí tương đối ổn định.
Maintain a relatively stable position. The figure maintained a relatively stable position. The most pronounced change.
Sự thay đổi rõ rệt nhất.
The most pronounced change. The most pronounced change occurred in 2019. Marginal yet consistent growth.
Tăng trưởng nhỏ nhưng nhất quán.
Marginal yet consistent growth. There was marginal yet consistent growth over 5 years. Outpaced the growth of.
Vượt qua tốc độ tăng trưởng của.
Outpaced the growth of. Service exports outpaced the growth of manufacturing. The disparity narrows significantly.
Sự chênh lệch thu hẹp đáng kể.
The disparity narrows significantly. By 2020, the disparity narrows significantly. Dominate the overall picture.
Chiếm ưu thế trong bức tranh tổng thể.
Dominate the overall picture. Asia dominates the overall picture of global growth. Be of the view that.
Có quan điểm rằng.
Be of the view that. Many scholars are of the view that reform is essential. Take umbrage at.
Phẫn nộ về.
Take umbrage at. Critics took umbrage at the minister's remarks. Lend support to the notion that.
Ủng hộ quan niệm rằng.
Lend support to the notion that. New data lends support to the notion that diet matters. Cast doubt on.
Đặt ra nghi ngờ về.
Cast doubt on. The results cast doubt on the original hypothesis. Take exception to.
Phản đối mạnh mẽ.
Take exception to. I take exception to the characterization of this group. Subscribe to the view that.
Đồng ý với quan điểm rằng.
Subscribe to the view that. I do not subscribe to the view that growth is everything. Take a nuanced position on.
Có lập trường tinh tế về.
Take a nuanced position on. She takes a nuanced position on immigration. Be at variance with.
Mâu thuẫn với.
Be at variance with. These findings are at variance with previous research. Concede the point that.
Thừa nhận điểm rằng.
Concede the point that. I concede the point that the cost is high. Remain unconvinced that.
Vẫn không bị thuyết phục rằng.
Remain unconvinced that. I remain unconvinced that the plan will work. Hold diametrically opposed views.
Giữ quan điểm trái ngược hoàn toàn.
Hold diametrically opposed views. The two parties hold diametrically opposed views. Reach a reasoned conclusion.
Đi đến kết luận có lý.
Reach a reasoned conclusion. A careful analysis allows us to reach a reasoned conclusion. Question the premise that.
Đặt câu hỏi về tiền đề rằng.
Question the premise that. We must question the premise that growth equals progress. Merit serious consideration.
Xứng đáng được xem xét nghiêm túc.
Merit serious consideration. This proposal merits serious consideration. Be beyond dispute.
Không thể tranh cãi.
Be beyond dispute. The need for action is beyond dispute. Urban gentrification.
Giới hóa đô thị.
Urban gentrification. Urban gentrification displaces long-term residents. Smart city infrastructure.
Cơ sở hạ tầng thành phố thông minh.
Smart city infrastructure. Smart city infrastructure improves efficiency. Urban heat island effect.
Hiệu ứng đảo nhiệt đô thị.
Urban heat island effect. The urban heat island effect worsens climate change. Spatial inequality.
Bất bình đẳng không gian.
Spatial inequality. Spatial inequality divides cities between rich and poor. Mixed income neighborhood.
Khu dân cư thu nhập hỗn hợp.
Mixed income neighborhood. Mixed income neighborhoods reduce segregation. Transit-oriented development.
Phát triển định hướng giao thông.
Transit-oriented development. Transit-oriented development reduces car dependency. Place a burden on public services.
Gây gánh nặng lên dịch vụ công.
Place a burden on public services. Rapid migration places a burden on public services. Urban-rural divide.
Khoảng cách thành thị nông thôn.
Urban-rural divide. The urban-rural divide deepens inequality. Regeneration project.
Dự án tái phát triển.
Regeneration project. The regeneration project transformed the waterfront. Social housing provision.
Cung cấp nhà ở xã hội.
Social housing provision. Adequate social housing provision is a government duty. Carbon neutral city.
Thành phố trung hòa carbon.
Carbon neutral city. Oslo aims to become a carbon neutral city. Walkability of a city.
Khả năng đi bộ của thành phố.
Walkability of a city. The walkability of a city affects residents' health. Urban sprawl.
Đô thị hóa lan tràn.
Urban sprawl. Urban sprawl consumes valuable agricultural land. Inclusive city planning.
Quy hoạch thành phố toàn diện.
Inclusive city planning. Inclusive city planning ensures no one is left behind. Vertical city development.
Phát triển đô thị theo chiều dọc.
Vertical city development. Vertical city development saves horizontal land space. Merit careful consideration.
Xứng đáng được xem xét cẩn thận.
Merit careful consideration. Both perspectives merit careful consideration. Defy simple categorization.
Không thể phân loại đơn giản.
Defy simple categorization. This issue defies simple categorization. Be deeply embedded in.
Được nhúng sâu trong.
Be deeply embedded in. These attitudes are deeply embedded in culture. Strike a delicate balance between.
Đạt được sự cân bằng tinh tế giữa.
Strike a delicate balance between. Governments must strike a delicate balance between freedom and security. Occupy a central place in.
Chiếm vị trí trung tâm trong.
Occupy a central place in. Education occupies a central place in national development. Resist easy solutions.
Chống lại các giải pháp dễ dàng.
Resist easy solutions. Complex problems resist easy solutions. Gain traction.
Được chấp nhận rộng rãi.
Gain traction. This idea has gained traction in recent years. Be fraught with difficulty.
Đầy khó khăn.
Be fraught with difficulty. The path to peace is fraught with difficulty. Challenge the conventional wisdom.
Thách thức quan niệm thông thường.
Challenge the conventional wisdom. This research challenges the conventional wisdom. Bring to the fore.
Đưa ra tiền cảnh.
Bring to the fore. The pandemic brought inequality to the fore. Call the effectiveness into question.
Đặt câu hỏi về hiệu quả.
Call the effectiveness into question. New evidence calls the effectiveness into question. Reach its full potential.
Đạt được tiềm năng đầy đủ.
Reach its full potential. Society cannot reach its full potential without equality. Lie beyond the scope of.
Nằm ngoài phạm vi của.
Lie beyond the scope of. This lies beyond the scope of a single policy. Redefine the boundaries of.
Xác định lại ranh giới của.
Redefine the boundaries of. AI redefines the boundaries of human capability. Leave much to be desired.
Còn nhiều điều đáng mong muốn.
Leave much to be desired. The current policy leaves much to be desired. Speak with conviction.
Nói với sự thuyết phục.
Speak with conviction. She speaks with conviction on every topic. Elaborate on the point.
Giải thích thêm về điểm đó.
Elaborate on the point. Could you elaborate on the point you made? Draw on personal experience.
Rút ra từ kinh nghiệm cá nhân.
Draw on personal experience. He draws on personal experience to illustrate his point. Hedge one's statement.
Nói thận trọng có bảo lưu.
Hedge one's statement. A good speaker knows when to hedge their statement. Respond in a measured way.
Phản hồi theo cách thận trọng.
Respond in a measured way. Try to respond in a measured way under pressure. Acknowledge the complexity of.
Thừa nhận sự phức tạp của.
Acknowledge the complexity of. Good candidates acknowledge the complexity of issues. Speculate with confidence.
Suy đoán với sự tự tin.
Speculate with confidence. He can speculate with confidence on future trends. Provide a balanced perspective.
Cung cấp quan điểm cân bằng.
Provide a balanced perspective. IELTS candidates should provide a balanced perspective. Speak at length about.
Nói dài về.
Speak at length about. She can speak at length about climate change. Use language precisely.
Sử dụng ngôn ngữ chính xác.
Use language precisely. Band 9 speakers use language precisely. Navigate a complex topic.
Điều hướng một chủ đề phức tạp.
Navigate a complex topic. She can navigate a complex topic effortlessly. Recover fluently from a slip.
Phục hồi lưu loát từ một lỗi.
Recover fluently from a slip. Band 8 speakers recover fluently from a slip. Make a clear distinction between.
Phân biệt rõ ràng giữa.
Make a clear distinction between. Always make a clear distinction between facts and opinions. Justify a position convincingly.
Biện hộ cho một lập trường một cách thuyết phục.
Justify a position convincingly. You must justify your position convincingly. Paraphrase with sophistication.
Diễn đạt lại với sự tinh tế.
Paraphrase with sophistication. Top candidates paraphrase with sophistication. Inalienable, right?
Quyền không thể tước đoạt.
Inalienable, right? Freedom of expression is an inalienable right. Gross violation of.
Vi phạm trắng trợn.
Gross violation of. Torture is a gross violation of human rights. Uphold human dignity.
Duy trì phẩm giá con người.
Uphold human dignity. Laws must uphold human dignity above all else. International humanitarian law.
Luật nhân đạo quốc tế.
International humanitarian law. All parties must comply with international humanitarian law. Seek redress for.
Tìm kiếm bồi thường cho.
Seek redress for. Victims have the right to seek redress for injustice. Entrench discrimination.
Củng cố phân biệt đối xử.
Entrench discrimination. Weak laws can entrench discrimination. A persecution of minorities.
Bức hại thiểu số.
Persecution of minorities. The persecution of minorities violates global norms. Hold accountable for.
Quy trách nhiệm về.
Hold accountable for. Governments must be held accountable for abuses. Champion the cause of.
Bảo vệ sự nghiệp của.
Champion the cause of. She has championed the cause of women's rights. Systemic oppression.
Áp bức có hệ thống.
Systemic oppression. Systemic oppression must be challenged structurally. Legitimate grievance.
Bất bình chính đáng.
Legitimate grievance. Citizens have legitimate grievances about inequality. Non-refoulement principle.
Nguyên tắc không trả lại.
Non-refoulement principle. The non-refoulement principle protects refugees. Freedom from arbitrary detention.
Tự do khỏi bắt giữ tùy tiện.
Freedom from arbitrary detention. Freedom from arbitrary detention is a basic right. Bear witness to.
Chứng kiến.
Bear witness to. We have borne witness to countless human rights abuses. Galvanize international support.
Thúc đẩy sự ủng hộ quốc tế.
Galvanize international support. The crisis galvanized international support. Labor market disruption.
Gián đoạn thị trường lao động.
Labor market disruption. AI causes significant labor market disruption. Portfolio career.
Sự nghiệp đa dạng.
Portfolio career. Millennials favor a portfolio career over a single job. Knowledge worker.
Công nhân tri thức.
Knowledge worker. Knowledge workers demand flexibility and autonomy. Human capital investment.
Đầu tư vào vốn con người.
Human capital investment. Human capital investment drives long-term growth. Cognitive automation.
Tự động hóa nhận thức.
Cognitive automation. Cognitive automation threatens professional roles. Future-proof skills.
Kỹ năng chống lỗi thời.
Future-proof skills. Workers must acquire future-proof skills. Precariat class.
Tầng lớp bấp bênh.
Precariat class. The gig economy creates a growing precariat class. Employer-employee contract.
Hợp đồng giữa chủ và nhân viên.
Employer-employee contract. The traditional employer-employee contract is changing. Workplace automation.
Tự động hóa nơi làm việc.
Workplace automation. Workplace automation increases productivity but cuts jobs. Universal basic income.
Thu nhập cơ bản toàn dân.
Universal basic income. Universal basic income is proposed as an automation safety net. Soft skills premium.
Phần thưởng cho kỹ năng mềm.
Soft skills premium. There is a growing soft skills premium in the job market. Creative destruction.
Phá hủy sáng tạo.
Creative destruction. Technological change involves creative destruction. Upskilling agenda.
Chương trình nâng cấp kỹ năng.
Upskilling agenda. Governments must drive an upskilling agenda. Talent pipeline.
Đường ống nhân tài.
Talent pipeline. Universities build a talent pipeline for industry. Obsolescence of skills.
Sự lỗi thời của kỹ năng.
Obsolescence of skills. Rapid change accelerates the obsolescence of skills. Pervasive.
Lan rộng khắp nơi.
Pervasive. The influence of social media is pervasive. Contentious.
Gây tranh cãi.
Contentious. Immigration is a highly contentious issue. To paramount.
Tối quan trọng.
A paramount. Safety is of paramount importance. Complacent.
Tự mãn.
Complacent. Governments must not be complacent about climate risks. Pragmatic.
Thực dụng.
Pragmatic. A pragmatic approach is often more effective. Untenable.
Không thể bảo vệ được.
Untenable. This position is logically untenable. Indispensable.
Không thể thiếu.
Indispensable. Teachers are indispensable to any society. Nebulous.
Mơ hồ không rõ ràng.
Nebulous. The plan remains nebulous and lacks detail. Commensurate.
Tương xứng.
Commensurate. The reward should be commensurate with the effort. Immutable.
Không thể thay đổi.
Immutable. Nothing in politics is immutable. Nascent.
Mới nổi.
Nascent. This is a nascent field of research. Recalcitrant.
Ngoan cố không chịu thay đổi.
Recalcitrant. Some nations remain recalcitrant on climate pledges. Inadvertent.
Vô tình không cố ý.
Inadvertent. The policy had inadvertent consequences. Dilapidated.
Xuống cấp tồi tàn.
Dilapidated. Many rural schools are in a dilapidated condition. Tangential.
Không liên quan trực tiếp.
Tangential. That point is tangential to the main argument. Perpetuate.
Duy trì. Làm tồn tại mãi.
Perpetuate. Poor policies perpetuate poverty. Ameliorate.
Cải thiện. Làm giảm nhẹ.
Ameliorate. Education can ameliorate the effects of poverty. Circumvent.
Lách qua. Né tránh.
Circumvent. Companies find ways to circumvent tax laws. Galvanize.
Thúc đẩy. Kích thích hành động.
Galvanize. The crisis galvanized the public to act. Impede.
Cản trở. Gây trở ngại.
Impede. Bureaucracy can impede economic progress. Conflate.
Nhầm lẫn. Đánh đồng.
Conflate. We must not conflate correlation with causation. Nullify.
Vô hiệu hóa.
Nullify. A court ruling can nullify legislation. Engender.
Tạo ra. Gây ra.
Engender. Inequality engenders social tension. Curtail.
Hạn chế. Cắt giảm.
Curtail. Governments can curtail civil liberties in emergencies. Vindicate.
Biện minh. Chứng minh là đúng.
Vindicate. The results vindicate the original hypothesis. Exacerbate.
Làm trầm trọng thêm.
Exacerbate. Climate change exacerbates existing inequalities. Coerce.
Ép buộc.
Coerce. States must not coerce citizens into compliance. Corroborate.
Xác nhận. Làm vững chắc thêm.
Corroborate. New studies corroborate the earlier findings. Proliferate.
Sinh sôi nảy nở, lan rộng.
Proliferate. Social media platforms continue to proliferate. Stymie.
Cản trở, làm bế tắc.
Stymie. Vested interests stymie meaningful reform. Media plurality.
Đa dạng truyền thông.
Media plurality. Media plurality is vital for healthy democracy. Echo chamber.
Buồng vang, bong bóng thông tin.
Echo chamber. Social media creates dangerous echo chambers. Information ecosystem.
Hệ sinh thái thông tin.
Information ecosystem. A healthy information ecosystem requires trust. Post-truth era.
Kỷ nguyên hậu sự thật.
Post-truth era. We live in a post-truth era of politics. Manufactured consent.
Sự đồng thuận được tạo ra.
Manufactured consent. Critics argue that media creates manufactured consent. Disinformation campaign.
Chiến dịch thông tin sai lệch.
Disinformation campaign. A disinformation campaign undermined public trust. Media ownership concentration.
Tập trung sở hữu truyền thông.
Media ownership concentration. Media ownership concentration threatens democracy. Digital journalism.
Báo chí kỹ thuật số.
Digital journalism. Digital journalism has transformed news consumption. Cultivate critical media literacy.
Nuôi dưỡng hiểu biết truyền thông phản biện.
Cultivate critical media literacy. Schools should cultivate critical media literacy. Algorithmic curation.
Curation theo thuật toán.
Algorithmic curation. Algorithmic curation shapes what people believe. Weaponize information.
Vũ khí hóa thông tin.
Weaponize information. States weaponize information to influence elections. Chilling effect on free speech.
Tác động ức chế lên tự do ngôn luận.
Chilling effect on free speech. Harsh libel laws have a chilling effect on free speech. Your platform regulation.
Quy định nền tảng.
Platform regulation. Platform regulation is needed to curb misinformation. Reputational damage.
Thiệt hại danh tiếng.
Reputational damage. The scandal caused significant reputational damage. Public interest journalism.
Báo chí vì lợi ích công cộng.
Public interest journalism. Public interest journalism must be protected and funded. Cultural imperialism.
Chủ nghĩa đế quốc văn hóa.
Cultural imperialism. Some critics view Hollywood as cultural imperialism. Cultural appropriation.
Chiếm đoạt văn hóa.
Cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation disrespects marginalized communities. Intangible cultural heritage.
Di sản văn hóa phi vật thể.
Intangible cultural heritage. Language is part of intangible cultural heritage. Cultural relativism.
Chủ nghĩa tương đối văn hóa.
Cultural relativism. Cultural relativism argues no culture is superior. Multicultural society.
Xã hội đa văn hóa.
Multicultural society. A multicultural society enriches all its members. Preserve linguistic diversity.
Bảo tồn đa dạng ngôn ngữ.
Preserve linguistic diversity. We must preserve linguistic diversity for future generations. Ethnocentrism.
Trung tâm luận tộc người.
Ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism prevents genuine cross-cultural understanding. Assimilation policy.
Chính sách đồng hóa.
Assimilation policy. Forced assimilation policies have been widely criticized. Cosmopolitan identity.
Bản sắc thế giới.
Cosmopolitan identity. Young people increasingly embrace a cosmopolitan identity. Cultural transmission.
Truyền đạt văn hóa.
Cultural transmission. Schools play a role in cultural transmission. Contested narrative.
Câu chuyện gây tranh cãi.
Contested narrative. History is often a contested narrative. Collective memory.
Ký ức tập thể.
Collective memory. War shapes the collective memory of a nation. Cultural renaissance.
Sự phục hưng văn hóa.
So, cultural renaissance. The country is experiencing a cultural renaissance. Lived experience.
Trải nghiệm sống thực tế.
Lived experience. Policy must be informed by lived experience. Cultural diplomacy.
Ngoại giao văn hóa.
Cultural diplomacy. Cultural diplomacy builds bridges between nations. In light of the foregoing,
Dưới góc độ những điều đã đề cập,
in light of the foregoing, a new approach is needed. As has been demonstrated.
như đã được chứng minh,
As has been demonstrated, the evidence is clear. The foregoing analysis suggests.
phân tích trên đây cho thấy,
The foregoing analysis suggests reform is needed. To recapitulate.
tóm lại một lần nữa,
To recapitulate, there are three main arguments. Predicated on the assumption that.
dựa trên giả định rằng,
This argument is predicated on the assumption that growth is good. A corollary of this is that.
hệ quả của điều này là,
A corollary of this is that inequality will worsen. It is axiomatic
điều hiển nhiên là,
prevention is better than cure. Therein lies the problem.
đó chính là vấn đề.
Therein lies the problem of this approach. This brings us to the crux of.
Điều này đưa chúng ta đến trọng tâm của.
This brings us to the crux of the debate. The implications are far-reaching.
Hàm ý là sâu rộng.
The implications are far-reaching for all societies. By extension.
Theo sự mở rộng.
By extension, this affects all citizens, not just the poor. To that end.
Để đạt được mục tiêu đó.
To that end, greater investment in education is essential. The logical conclusion is that.
Kết luận logic là.
The logical conclusion is that action is needed now. One is therefore drawn to conclude.
Do đó, người ta bị dẫn đến kết luận.
One is therefore drawn to conclude that reform is inevitable. Ipso facto.
Do đó, tự nó.
Ipso facto. A monopoly is ipso facto a threat to competition. The elephant in the room.
Vấn đề ai cũng thấy nhưng không ai nói.
The elephant in the room. Inequality is the elephant in the room in this debate. Move the goalposts.
Thay đổi luật chơi giữa chừng.
Move the goalposts. Changing policy constantly moves the goalposts. The thin end of the wedge.
Khởi đầu của điều tệ hơn.
The thin end of the wedge. Some see surveillance cameras as the thin end of the wedge. A double-edged sword.
Con dao hai lưỡi.
A double-edged sword. Technology is a double-edged sword. Pay lip service to.
Chỉ nói suông.
Pay lip service to. Governments pay lip service to equality, but do little. Open a Pandora's box.
Mở ra hộp Pandora.
Open a Pandora's box. Genetic editing could open a Pandora's box of ethical issues. A zero-sum game.
Trò chơi tổng bằng không.
A zero-sum game. Trade need not be a zero-sum game. Cut through the noise.
Vượt qua sự ồn ào.
Cut through the noise. Good analysis cuts through the noise of public debate. The tip of the iceberg.
Phần nổi của tảng băng chìm.
The tip of the iceberg. The reported cases are merely the tip of the iceberg. A paradigm shift.
Sự thay đổi mô thức.
A paradigm shift. AI represents a paradigm shift in human history. The path of least resistance.
Con đường ít kháng cự nhất.
The path of least resistance. Governments often take the path of least resistance. Be at a crossroads.
Đứng ở ngã tư đường.
Be at a crossroads. Humanity is at a crossroads on climate change. The point of no return.
Điểm không thể quay lại.
The point of no return. We may be approaching the point of no return. Hold the key to.
Nắm giữ chìa khóa cho.
Hold the key to. Education holds the key to breaking the poverty cycle. Rise to the occasion.
Vươn lên đáp ứng thách thức.
Rise to the occasion. Humanity has always risen to the occasion in a crisis.